What if I told you that the richest, wisest, most powerful man who ever lived discovered that everything he achieved was meaningless? What if the man who had 1,000 wives built a temple of gold and wrote the most profound wisdom literature in human history stood at the end of his life and said, "It was all vanity, all of it"? King Solomon had everything, everything. More wealth than Jeff Bezos, more wisdom than Einstein, more power than any modern president. He could have anything he wanted with a snap of his fingers. Wine, women, palaces, pleasure, knowledge, fame. But what no one knew was in the middle of all that abundance, Solomon was dying inside, empty, searching, crying out in the darkness of his soul. What is the point of any of this? And here's the shocking truth. Most people today are making the exact same mistake Solomon made, chasing the same empty promises, climbing the same broken ladder, and wondering why, when they reach the top, they still feel hollow inside. What happened next left everyone in shock, because at the end of his life, Solomon discovered a secret, a hidden truth that changes everything about how we pursue happiness, success, and meaning. I'm so grateful you're here for this journey. If you're new to life in Christ, welcome home. This is where we dig deep into God's Word and discover truths that transform lives. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now, because this message might be exactly what your soul has been searching for. Today, we're walking through the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon's final confession, his ultimate wisdom, his warning to every generation. And that's when everything changed for him, and maybe, just maybe, for you too. Let's begin. Picture this: Jerusalem, approximately 950 BC, the golden age of Israel. And at the center of it all sits King Solomon, son of David, the third king of Israel, ruler of a united kingdom that stretched from Egypt to the Euphrates River. The Bible tells us in 1 Kings 4 verses 29 to 30, God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the people of the East, and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. But it wasn't just wisdom. According to 1 Kings 10 verse 23, King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. His annual income? 666 talents of gold, roughly 25 tons of gold per year. In today's money? Billions. But what no one knew was Solomon didn't start out seeking wealth and power. When God appeared to him in a dream at Gibeon and said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you," do you know what Solomon asked for? Not riches, not long life, not victory over his enemies. He asked for wisdom. Give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. And God was so pleased with this request that he said, "Since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor." At that moment, Solomon became the most blessed man on earth. The Lord had chosen him, anointed him, equipped him with supernatural wisdom. And that's when everything changed. Solomon had God's favor, unlimited resources, and a mind sharper than any human before or since. He had everything he needed to be happy. So why, decades later, would he write these haunting words? Meaningless. Meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What happened to King Solomon? Solomon's first great achievement was building the house of the Lord. This wasn't just any building. This was the dwelling place of God himself on earth, the place where heaven would meet humanity. For 7 years, 30,000 laborers worked day and night. They quarried the finest limestone. They imported cedar from Lebanon. They overlaid everything with pure gold: the walls, the floors, the altar, the cherubim. According to 1 Kings 6 verse 22, Solomon covered the whole interior with gold. Can you imagine walking into that temple? The smell of incense, the shimmer of gold everywhere you looked, the presence of God so thick you could barely stand. And on the day of dedication, something extraordinary happened. 2 Chronicles 7 verse 1 tells us, when Solomon finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. The glory was so intense that the priests couldn't even enter. They fell on their faces. The people worshipped. And God spoke to Solomon directly. I have heard your prayer and have chosen this place for myself as a temple for sacrifices. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. At that moment, she felt as if the world was falling apart. No, wait, at that moment, Solomon felt as if he was standing at the pinnacle of human achievement. He had built God's house. He had God's approval. He had God's promise. But what no one knew was this was just the beginning. The temple was glorious, yes. But Solomon's heart, his human heart, was about to be tested in ways he never imagined. Because success, even godly success, can become the most dangerous idol of all. When you build something great for God, there's a subtle temptation to start believing it's about you, your wisdom, your skill, your glory. And that's when everything changed. The temple stood magnificent, but something was already shifting in Solomon's soul. Solomon's wisdom became legendary. People traveled from every corner of the known world just to hear him speak. Kings and queens brought their most difficult questions, their unsolvable riddles, their complex diplomatic problems. And Solomon had the answer every single time. The Bible tells us in 1 Kings 4 verses 32 to 34. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He spoke about plant life, from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of walls. He also spoke about animals and birds, reptiles and fish. From all nations people came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world, who had heard of his wisdom. 3,000 proverbs, 1,000 songs, expertise in botany, zoology, politics, philosophy, poetry, music. This wasn't just intelligence. This was supernatural wisdom from God himself. Remember the famous story of the two mothers fighting over one baby? Two women came to Solomon, both claiming to be the mother of the same infant. One baby had died in the night, and now both women insisted the living child was theirs. What did Solomon do? He called for a sword, cut the living child in two, and give half to one and half to the other. One woman said, "Fine, if I can't have him, neither can she." But the real mother cried out, "No, please, give her the baby. Just let him live." And Solomon knew. The real mother would rather lose her child than see him harmed. "Give the living baby to the first woman," he declared. "She is his mother." When the people heard this judgment, 1 Kings 3 verse 28 says, they held the king in awe, because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice. But what no one knew was that wisdom, as powerful as it is, cannot fill the emptiness in the human soul. Solomon could solve everyone else's problems, but he couldn't solve his own. He could answer every question except the one burning in his own heart. Why am I here? What is the meaning of all this? At that moment, he felt as if the world was bowing at his feet. Queens praised him. Kings honored him. Common people worshipped his intellect. But late at night, in the silence of his palace, Solomon was beginning to feel something he couldn't explain. A void, a restlessness, a hunger that knowledge couldn't satisfy. And that's when everything changed. Because Solomon was about to embark on the most dangerous experiment of his life. If wisdom couldn't bring fulfillment, what would? He was about to find out. Solomon stood in his palace and made a decision. He said to himself, as recorded in Ecclesiastes 2 verse 1, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good." If wisdom wasn't enough, maybe pleasure would be. Maybe happiness was found in enjoyment, in laughter, in entertainment, in the finest things life could offer. So Solomon dove headfirst into a life of absolute indulgence. He built himself houses, magnificent structures that made other palaces look like peasant huts. He planted vineyards that stretched across the hillsides. He created gardens and parks, filling them with every kind of tree, exotic plants from distant lands. He made reservoirs to water his groves of flourishing trees. Ecclesiastes 2 verse 8 describes his wealth. I amassed silver and gold for myself, and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers, and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. Whatever his eyes desired, he did not keep from them. Whatever brought pleasure, he pursued it. The finest wines, the most talented musicians playing day and night, jesters and entertainers, feasts that lasted for days. Every pleasure known to humanity was at his fingertips. Can you imagine? Never having to deny yourself anything. If you wanted it, you had it. If you dreamed it, it was yours. No budget, no limits, no one to tell you no. But here's what Solomon discovered, and this is crucial. After all the parties, after all the pleasure, after all the indulgence, he wrote these words in Ecclesiastes 2 verses 10 to 11. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. But what no one knew was that pleasure has a cruel deception built into it. The more you have, the more you need. The first taste is thrilling. The second is satisfying. But by the 100th, the 1000th time, it becomes routine, boring, empty. Solomon discovered what millions of people are discovering today. Pleasure is like drinking salt water. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. It promises satisfaction, but delivers only temporary relief followed by deeper craving. At that moment, he felt as if the world was his playground, but his heart was becoming a prison. The laughter echoed hollow. The wine tasted flat. The entertainment felt staged and meaningless. And that's when everything changed. If pleasure wasn't the answer, Solomon thought, maybe it was achievement. Maybe meaning was found in building something that lasts, in leaving a legacy, in accomplishing great works. So he turned his attention to the next experiment. Solomon looked out over Jerusalem and decided to build. Not just a temple. He had already done that. Now he would build a legacy that would outlast him for generations. Monuments, structures, projects that would make his name immortal. He undertook great projects. He built the royal palace, which took 13 years to complete, even longer than the temple itself. He constructed the palace of the forest of Lebanon with its rows of cedar columns. He built the hall of justice, where he sat on his throne to judge. He created a palace for Pharaoh's daughter, one of his wives, that rivaled anything in Egypt. But it didn't stop there. Solomon built entire cities, storage cities for his chariots and horses. He built Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer, fortifying them with massive walls. He created a naval fleet at Ezion-Geber. He established trade routes that brought wealth flowing into Israel from every direction. According to 1 Kings 9 verse 23, he had 550 officials supervising the workers on his projects. Thousands upon thousands of laborers, craftsmen, engineers, all working to build Solomon's vision. The Lord had blessed his hands. Everything he touched turned to success. When the Queen of Sheba came to visit and saw all that he had accomplished, 1 Kings 10 verse 5 says, she was overwhelmed. She told him, the report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. But I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth you have far exceeded the report I heard. Solomon had done it. He had built an empire, a legacy. His name would be remembered forever. Future generations would study his achievements. Historians would write about his accomplishments. But what no one knew was that late at night, when the construction stopped and the workers went home, Solomon walked through his empty palaces and felt nothing. Pride? Yes, for a moment. Satisfaction? Briefly. But fulfillment? No. He wrote in Ecclesiastes 2 verses 18 to 19, I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish? Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil, into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun." At that moment, he felt as if the world was celebrating his greatness, but inside he was wrestling with a terrifying truth. Everything he built would crumble. Everything he achieved would be forgotten. Someone else would inherit it, and they might destroy it or squander it or simply not care. What's the point of building if it all falls apart? What's the point of achieving if you can't take it with you? What's the point of leaving a legacy if your name will eventually fade into dust? And that's when everything changed. Achievement, like pleasure, like wisdom, was another dead end, another broken promise, another empty well. So Solomon turned to the next thing. If personal accomplishment wasn't enough, maybe the answer was found in relationships, in love, in connection with others. But this next experiment would prove to be his most devastating mistake. Solomon turned his heart toward love. Not just one love, but many. If one woman could bring joy, imagine what hundreds could bring. If companionship was meaningful, surely more companionship would be more meaningful. The Bible records in 1 Kings 11 verse 3, he had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. 1,000 women. Can you even fathom that? This wasn't just about desire or lust, though that was certainly part of it. Many of these marriages were political alliances. Pharaoh's daughter, Moabite princesses, Ammonite noblewomen, Edomite royalty, Sidonians, Hittites. Each marriage sealed a treaty, secured a border, guaranteed peace with a neighboring nation. Solomon thought he was being wise. He was building relationships, creating diplomatic ties, ensuring Israel's security through marriage alliances. This was strategy, not just indulgence. But what no one knew was that God had explicitly warned against this very thing. Deuteronomy 17 verse 17 commanded, "He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray." And that's exactly what happened. At first, Solomon maintained his devotion to the Lord. He kept the foreign wives at a distance from his worship. He continued to offer sacrifices at the temple. He still prayed. But slowly, gradually, imperceptibly, things began to change. His wives began to complain. Why can't we worship our gods? Why must we abandon our traditions? They built altars to Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians. They worshipped Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. They burned incense to Chemosh, the god of Moab. And Solomon, to keep peace, to maintain harmony, to please them, allowed it. Then he participated. Then he built high places for these foreign gods on a hill east of Jerusalem. 1 Kings 11 verse foretells us, as Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. Can you hear the tragedy in those words? His heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God. The man who built God's temple. The man who received wisdom directly from heaven. The man who once prayed with such passion that fire fell from the sky. Now his heart was divided, compromised, polluted. At that moment, he felt as if the world was spinning out of control, but he couldn't stop it. He had made commitments. He had responsibilities. To divorce these women would break treaties, start wars, destabilize his kingdom. So he stayed, and his heart grew colder, harder, further from God. The Lord, who had appeared to Solomon twice, who had blessed him beyond measure, now came with a different message. 1 Kings 11 verse 11. "Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates." But what no one knew was that this judgment wouldn't fall on Solomon himself. It would fall on his son. God said, "Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son." And that's when everything changed. Solomon realized that his pursuit of love, of connection, of intimacy with 1,000 women had left him more alone than ever. You cannot love everyone. You cannot be intimate with crowds. Real love requires devotion, focus, sacrifice, exclusivity. He had 1,000 wives and not one true companion. 1,000 relationships, and complete loneliness. He had chased love and found only emptiness. What else was there? What other experiment could he try? Solomon threw himself into work. Maybe meaning wasn't found in pleasure or achievement or relationships. Maybe it was found in the doing itself, in the labor, in the daily grind of productivity and purpose. He worked tirelessly, managing his kingdom, overseeing construction projects, judging legal cases, writing proverbs, composing songs, studying nature, trading with foreign nations. Every moment of every day filled with activity, busyness, purpose. And for a while, it felt good. There's something satisfying about work, isn't there? About checking things off a list. About building something with your hands. About solving problems and seeing results. But then Solomon noticed something disturbing. He wrote about it in Ecclesiastes 1 verses 3 to 4. What do people gain from all their labors, at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. He began to see the futility of it all. He would work hard all day, accomplish great things, and the next morning there would be more work waiting. He would solve one problem, and 3 more would appear. He would finish one project, and someone would ask, "What's next?" It never ended. The work was never done. The cycle was endless. Ecclesiastes 1 verse 8 captures his exhaustion. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. He looked at the workers building his palaces. They toiled from sunrise to sunset, sweating, straining, lifting stones, mixing mortar. And for what? A wage that would feed their families for a week before they had to do it all over again. He looked at the farmers planting crops, working the soil, waiting for rain, harvesting, selling, and then planting again, year after year, generation after generation. The same cycle repeating endlessly. But what no one knew was that Solomon was starting to ask a question that terrified him. What's the difference between me and them? I'm richer, yes. I'm more powerful. I'm more accomplished. But am I any happier? Am I any more fulfilled? Ecclesiastes 2 verses 22 to 23 reveals his inner turmoil. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days their work is grief and pain. Even at night their minds do not rest. Even at night their minds do not rest. Have you ever felt that? You're exhausted, but your brain won't shut off. You're thinking about tomorrow's tasks, worrying about next week's problems, planning, strategizing, stressing. At that moment, he felt as if the world was a giant hamster wheel, and he was running faster and faster, but getting nowhere. The work never brought lasting satisfaction. The productivity never filled the void. The busyness only masked the emptiness for a few hours before it came rushing back. And that's when everything changed. Solomon realized that work, like everything else he had tried, was another form of chasing after the wind. You run after it, you grasp at it, but you can never catch it. You can never hold it. It slips through your fingers every single time. So if wisdom fails, and pleasure fails, and achievement fails, and love fails, and work fails, what's left? Where else could he look for meaning? Solomon decided to explore something darker, something most people avoid. He would confront the one reality that everyone tries to ignore: death. Solomon sat in his palace one evening and allowed himself to think about the one thing everyone avoids: death. The great equalizer. The final appointment that no one can cancel. He began to observe the world with this new lens, and what he saw shook him to his core. Ecclesiastes 2 verses 14 to 16 captures his realization. The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fool walks in the darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. Then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this too is meaningless. For the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. Do you hear the anguish in those words? Solomon realized that all his wisdom, all his knowledge, all his understanding meant nothing in the face of death. The fool dies. The wise man dies. The rich man dies. The poor man dies. The king dies. The slave dies. Everyone ends up in the same place. In the ground. Forgotten. Dust returning to dust. He walked through the cemetery and saw the graves of great men. Kings who once ruled with power. Warriors who won legendary battles. Wise men whose counsel shaped nations. And now, their bones were indistinguishable from the bones of beggars and criminals. Ecclesiastes 3 verses 19 to 20 reveals his darkest thoughts. Surely the fate of human beings is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. Humans have no advantage over the animals. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return. But what no one knew was that this confrontation with mortality was pushing Solomon into a crisis. If death makes everything meaningless, why do anything? Why build? Why achieve? Why love? Why work? Why even get out of bed in the morning? He wrote in Ecclesiastes 4 verses 2 to 3, "And I declared that the dead who had already died are happier than the living, who are still alive. But better than both is the one who has never been born, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun." Better to have never been born. That's despair talking. That's a man who has lost hope. That's someone staring into the void and finding nothing, absolutely nothing, to hold on to. At that moment, he felt as if the world was a cosmic joke. A cruel game where everyone pretends life matters, where everyone acts like their achievements are significant, where everyone fights and strives and works, only to end up in a grave, forgotten, meaningless. Solomon looked at his temple, his palaces, his wealth, his wisdom, and realized, I'm going to die. And when I die, all of this becomes someone else's problem. All my work, all my sacrifice, all my effort, gone. And that's when everything changed. Because in the depths of his despair, in the darkness of his nihilism, Solomon stumbled upon something. A glimmer, a thread, a possibility that maybe, just maybe, he had been looking for meaning in all the wrong places. Maybe the problem wasn't that life is meaningless. Maybe the problem was that he had been searching for meaning under the sun, in earthly things, in temporary pleasures, in mortal achievements. What if meaning existed somewhere else? What if purpose was found not in what he could build, but in who he could worship? As Solomon wrestled with these dark thoughts, he began to observe human behavior more carefully. He watched how people interacted, how they worked, how they competed with one another. And he discovered another source of emptiness that plagued humanity. He wrote in Ecclesiastes 4 verse 4, "And I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind." Think about that. Why do people work so hard? Why do they push themselves to exhaustion? Solomon realized it wasn't usually about the work itself. It was about comparison, about keeping up with the neighbors, about having more than the person next door. He saw merchants in the marketplace, not satisfied with honest profit, but obsessed with outdoing their competitors. He saw builders constructing houses, not because they needed more space, but because their rival had built something grander. He saw women adorning themselves with jewelry, not for their own joy, but to outshine other women at the banquet. The entire society ran on envy, on comparison, on the exhausting treadmill of one-upmanship. And Solomon, sitting on his throne, realized he was guilty of the same thing. Why did he need 1,000 wives? Because other kings had harems. Why did he build so many palaces? Because Pharaoh had impressive structures. Why did he accumulate so much gold? Because wealth was how kings measured themselves against each other. But what no one knew was that this competition never ends. There's always someone with more, someone smarter, someone stronger, someone richer. And even if you reach the top, even if you become the greatest, you live in constant fear of being surpassed. Solomon watched young nobles in his court, ambitious men climbing the ladder of power. They smiled at each other publicly, but schemed against each other privately. They pretended friendship, but harbored jealousy. They celebrated each other's victories, but secretly hoped for each other's failures. At that moment, he felt as if the world was a game no one could win. Because even victory was hollow. Even being number one was temporary. Someone younger, hungrier, more ruthless was always coming up behind you. He wrote in Ecclesiastes 4 verses 5 to 6, "Fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind." In other words, it's better to have less and be at peace than to have more and be miserable. It's better to be content with enough than to destroy yourself chasing after more. But society doesn't teach that, does it? Society teaches: compete, win, dominate, accumulate. Get ahead. Stay ahead. Never settle. Never be satisfied. Always want more. And that's when everything changed. Solomon saw through the lie. Competition wasn't making anyone happy. Envy wasn't creating fulfillment. The entire system was designed to keep people perpetually dissatisfied, always reaching, always grasping, always empty. He looked at his life and asked, how much of what I've done was for God, and how much was to impress others? How much was genuine worship, and how much was just me trying to be greater than my father David? How much was obedience to the Lord, and how much was ego? The questions haunted him, and they led him to examine another area of his life, another place where he had sought meaning and found only disappointment. His own family. Solomon had many sons. With 1,000 wives, he had fathered numerous children who should have been his pride and joy, his legacy, the continuation of everything he had built. But when he looked at his family, he didn't see blessing. He saw chaos. His sons fought with each other. They competed for his attention. They plotted for position in the succession. They lived lives of luxury and entitlement, never knowing hunger, never understanding struggle, never appreciating the sacrifices that built the kingdom they would inherit. And the worst part? Solomon knew he had failed them as a father. He had given them everything except the one thing they needed most: his time, his presence, his guidance, his love. He had been too busy building temples and palaces, too busy managing the kingdom, too busy entertaining foreign dignitaries, too busy writing proverbs for strangers while neglecting to teach wisdom to his own children. Ecclesiastes 2 verses 18 to 21 reveals his deepest regret. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish. Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave all they own to another who has not toiled for it. But what no one knew was that Solomon's greatest fear was already coming true. His son Rehoboam was growing up arrogant, foolish, surrounded by yes-men who told him what he wanted to hear instead of the truth he needed to know. Solomon could see it happening, but felt powerless to stop it. He had lost influence over his own son. The boy respected his position, but didn't respect the man. He wanted the crown, but rejected the wisdom that came with it. And it wasn't just Rehoboam. Solomon's other sons were watching, waiting, scheming. After Solomon's death, they would tear the kingdom apart, fighting over the throne. All the unity David had built, all the peace Solomon had maintained, would shatter in a single generation. At that moment, he felt as if the world was mocking him. What good is building an empire if your children destroy it? What good is accumulating wisdom if your sons refuse to learn it? What good is being called the wisest man who ever lived if you can't even raise wise children? The Bible would later record the fulfillment of Solomon's fears. After his death, Rehoboam would make foolish decisions that split the kingdom in two. The northern tribes would rebel. Civil war would erupt. Everything Solomon built would crumble. And that's when everything changed in Solomon's understanding. Legacy. That thing everyone chases, that dream of being remembered, of leaving something behind, it's all uncertain. You can't control what happens after you're gone. You can't guarantee that your children will honor your memory or continue your work. Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes 5 verses 15 to 16, "Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands. This too is a grievous evil. As everyone comes, so they depart, and what do they gain, since they toil for the wind? You come into this world with nothing. You leave with nothing. Everything in between? Temporary, uncertain, fleeting." But Solomon wasn't done searching. He had one more place to look, one more possible source of meaning that perhaps he had overlooked in his pursuit of everything else. He turned his attention to religion itself. Solomon had built the temple. He had established the priesthood. He had organized the sacrifices. He had created elaborate religious ceremonies. Thousands of animals were slaughtered every year. Festivals were celebrated. Prayers were recited. The machinery of religion ran like clockwork. But something was wrong. Something was hollow. He began to observe the worshippers coming to the temple. They brought their sacrifices, yes. They said their prayers, yes. They went through all the motions. But their hearts were somewhere else entirely. They would worship God on the Sabbath, then cheat their neighbors on Sunday. They would offer sacrifices in the morning, then commit adultery in the evening. They would sing praises with their mouths, while their minds calculated business deals, and their hearts harbored bitterness. Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes 5 verse 1, "Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Go near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools, who do not know that they do wrong." The sacrifice of fools. What does that mean? It means going through religious motions without genuine heart change. It means performing rituals without relationship. It means checking boxes without transformation. And Solomon realized, with horror, that he himself had become the chief fool. He had built God's temple while his own heart wandered after other gods. He had organized worship services while committing idolatry. He had written beautiful prayers while his life contradicted every word. But what no one knew was that this hypocrisy was eating him alive. He couldn't escape it. Every time he entered the temple, every time he saw the altar, every time he smelled the incense, he was reminded of his own betrayal. He had made vows to God, serious, solemn vows, and he had broken them. Ecclesiastes 5 verses 4 to 5 warns, "When you make a vow to God, do not delay to fulfill it. He has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vow. It is better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it." Solomon had vowed to follow the Lord with all his heart. He had promised to keep God's commands. He had committed to lead Israel in righteousness. And he had failed. Spectacularly. Completely. The temple stood as a monument to his broken promises. The sacrifices continued as a reminder of his unfaithfulness. The prayers echoed as accusations against his compromised heart. At that moment, he felt as if the world was closing in on him. He couldn't hide behind religion anymore. He couldn't pretend that going through the motions was enough. God saw through it all. God knew the truth. And God was not impressed. Ecclesiastes 5 verse 2 captures his warning. "Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven, and you are on earth, so let your words be few." Let your words be few. In other words, stop making promises you won't keep. Stop saying things you don't mean. Stop pretending to be something you're not. And that's when everything changed in Solomon's spiritual journey. He realized that religion without relationship is worthless. Rituals without repentance are empty. Ceremonies without sincerity are an insult to God. The Lord didn't want his sacrifices. He wanted his heart. The Lord didn't need his temple. He wanted his obedience. The Lord wasn't impressed by his elaborate worship services. He wanted his genuine devotion. But how could Solomon return? How could he rebuild what he had destroyed? How could he restore a relationship he had betrayed for decades? The weight of his failure was crushing him. and he was about to discover something that would either save him or destroy him completely. Solomon turned his attention to his vast wealth, the gold that filled his treasuries, the silver that was as common as stones in Jerusalem during his reign. Surely this was something real, something tangible, something that proved his success. But as he examined his relationship with wealth, he discovered something disturbing. He wrote in Ecclesiastes 5 verse 10, "Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income." This too is meaningless. He had more money than any human could spend in 10 lifetimes. But it wasn't enough. There was always another trade deal to negotiate, another treasure to acquire, another way to increase his holdings. The appetite for more never stopped growing, and the more he accumulated, the more problems came with it. Ecclesiastes 5 verse 11 says, "As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them?" Every new treasure required guards to protect it. Every new possession required servants to maintain it. Every new source of income required administrators to manage it. His wealth had become a burden, not a blessing. He couldn't even sleep peacefully anymore. Ecclesiastes 5 verse 12 reveals, "The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much. But as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep." While the simple farmer slept soundly after a day's work, Solomon lay awake at night worrying about thieves, worrying about corrupt officials, worrying about economic changes, worrying about which son would inherit what, worrying about investments and trade routes and political stability. But what no one knew was that Solomon had watched wealthy men lose everything in a single moment. He wrote in Ecclesiastes 5 verses 13 to 14, "I have seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children there is nothing left for them to inherit. A bad business deal, a shipwreck, a war, a drought, and suddenly a lifetime of accumulated wealth could vanish like smoke." He had seen merchants who were rich one day and bankrupt the next. He had seen noble families brought to ruin by a single catastrophic loss. And even if you kept your wealth until death, what then? Ecclesiastes 5 verses 15 to 16 drives home the point. "Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands." This too is a grievous evil. As everyone comes, so they depart, and what do they gain, since they toil for the wind? Solomon looked at his treasure rooms, piled high with gold and silver and precious stones, and he realized, "I can't take any of it with me. When I die, I'll be just as naked as the poorest beggar in Jerusalem." What was the point of accumulating all this? At that moment, he felt as if the world was playing a cosmic joke on him. Society told him that wealth equals success, that money brings security, that riches provide happiness. But he had tested this theory with unlimited resources, and the conclusion was undeniable. It's all a lie. Money doesn't buy happiness. It buys temporary comfort at best and endless anxiety at worst. Wealth doesn't provide security. It creates new vulnerabilities. Riches don't bring meaning. They distract from the search for real purpose. And that's when everything changed in how Solomon viewed possessions. He stopped seeing his wealth as an achievement and started seeing it as a responsibility. He stopped measuring his success by his bank account and started asking different questions. If wealth isn't the answer, if possessions don't bring fulfillment, if money can't buy meaning, then what should a person pursue? What should be the focus of life? Solomon was getting closer to the answer, but he still had more ground to cover in his journey through emptiness. As Solomon continued his observations, he began to see something that deeply troubled his soul. He saw the injustice that permeated society, the oppression of the weak, the exploitation of the poor, the corruption of those in power. He wrote in Ecclesiastes 4 verse 1, "Again I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter." They have no comforter. That phrase appears twice in one verse. Do you hear the anguish? Solomon saw people suffering, crying out for help, and no one came to their aid. The powerful crushed the weak, and there was no justice. The rich exploited the poor, and there was no accountability. He saw laborers working from dawn to dusk for wages that could barely feed their families, while their employers lived in luxury. He saw widows cheated out of their inheritances by corrupt officials. He saw orphans left to starve while the wealthy hoarded grain. He saw honest merchants destroyed by dishonest competition. And what horrified Solomon most was that some of this injustice was happening in his own kingdom, under his own rule. Despite all his wisdom, despite all his efforts to establish justice, the system was still broken. The corruption was too deep. The greed was too strong. The evil was too pervasive. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 16 reveals a shock, and I saw something else under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was there. In the place of judgment, in the courts, in the very halls where justice should reign, wickedness thrived. Judges took bribes. Officials perverted justice for personal gain. The legal system that was supposed to protect the innocent often destroyed them instead. But what no one knew was that Solomon felt personally responsible. He was the king. This was his kingdom. These were his courts, his judges, his officials. And yet, he couldn't stop the corruption. He couldn't fix the system. No matter how many reforms he implemented, the rot always returned. He wrote in Ecclesiastes 5 verse 8, "If you see the poor oppressed in a district and justice and rights denied, do not be surprised at such things, for one official is eyed by a higher one, and over them both are others higher still." In other words, the corruption was systemic. It wasn't just one bad judge or one corrupt official. It was layers upon layers of complicity. One official protected another, who protected another, who protected another. The entire structure was compromised from top to bottom. At that moment, he felt as if the world was fundamentally broken, and no human power could fix it. Not his wisdom, not his wealth, not his authority as king. The evil was too entrenched. The darkness was too deep. And worse, he realized that he himself had contributed to some of this injustice. In his pursuit of building projects, how many laborers had been worked beyond their strength? In his political marriages, how many women had been treated as commodities rather than human beings? In his accumulation of wealth, how many poor people had been taxed into poverty? His hands weren't clean. His record wasn't pure. He was part of the problem, not just an observer of it. And that's when everything changed in Solomon's understanding of the human condition. He realized that sin wasn't just personal, it was corporate. It wasn't just individual, it was systemic. It wasn't just a few bad people doing bad things. It was a whole world structure built on greed, power, and exploitation. No wonder nothing satisfied. No wonder everything was meaningless. No wonder pleasure and achievement and wealth all failed to bring fulfillment. The whole world was corrupted. The entire system was broken. And there was no human solution. Unless there was a power greater than human power. Unless there was a justice higher than earthly justice. Unless there was a God who saw everything, who remembered everything, who would one day set all things right. That thought, terrifying and comforting at the same time, was beginning to take shape in Solomon's mind. In all his observations, Solomon noticed another profound emptiness, the loneliness that comes from isolation, from pride, from refusing to need anyone else. He wrote in Ecclesiastes 4 verse 8, "There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling?" he asked, "and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment?" This, too, is meaningless, a miserable business. Solomon saw people who had isolated themselves in their pursuit of success. They worked endlessly, accumulated wealth, achieved great things, but they had no one to share it with, no one to celebrate their victories, no one to comfort them in their failures. They were completely, utterly alone. And the tragedy? Many of them chose this isolation. They pushed people away because relationships were complicated. They avoided connection because vulnerability was scary. They built walls around their hearts because they had been hurt before and refused to risk it again. But Solomon knew better. He wrote in Ecclesiastes 4 verses 9 to 10, "Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up." He had seen it countless times. A man falls into crisis, financial disaster, personal tragedy, and if he has no one, no community, no relationships, he stays down. He can't recover alone. But a man with true friends, with genuine community, with people who love him, he gets back up. He survives. He overcomes. But what no one knew was that Solomon himself was experiencing this loneliness. Despite having 1,000 wives and countless servants and advisors surrounding him constantly, he was profoundly alone. Why? Because none of those relationships were real. His wives had been acquired for political purposes. His servants feared him more than they loved him. His advisors told him what he wanted to hear rather than what he needed to know. He was surrounded by people but connected to no one. At that moment, he felt as if the world was full of faces but empty of friends. He had acquaintances but no companions. He had subjects but no brothers. He had power but no partnership. And his pride had contributed to this isolation. He was King Solomon, the wisest man alive. How could he be vulnerable? How could he admit weakness? How could he ask for help? His reputation, his image, his position, all of it required him to appear strong, confident, in control at all times. But that mask was suffocating him. That performance was exhausting him. That isolation was killing him slowly from the inside. Ecclesiastes 4 verse 13 reveals another dimension of this truth. Better a poor, but wise youth than an old, but foolish king, who no longer knows how to heed a warning. Solomon was describing himself. He had become that old foolish king. People warned him about his idolatry, but he didn't listen. People cautioned him about his excess, but he ignored them. He had stopped being teachable. He had stopped accepting correction. His pride had made him unteachable, and his isolation had made him unreachable. And that's when everything changed. Solomon realized that pride doesn't just separate us from other people. It separates us from God. When we think we don't need anyone, when we believe we're self-sufficient, when we refuse to be vulnerable, we cut ourselves off from the very connections that make life meaningful. God designed humans for relationship. First, relationship with Him. Then, relationship with each other. The whole under-the-sun existence, the whole earthly pursuit of meaning, was failing because Solomon had forgotten the vertical dimension. He had been so focused on horizontal pursuits, wealth, pleasure, achievement, that he had neglected the vertical relationship with his Creator. And without that vertical connection to God, all the horizontal pursuits remained empty, meaningless, futile. Solomon was beginning to see it now. The problem wasn't that life had no meaning. The problem was that he had been looking for meaning in all the wrong places. In the midst of all his despair and searching, Solomon began to notice something beautiful, something profound about the rhythm and timing of life. And he wrote one of the most famous passages in all of Scripture. Ecclesiastes 3 verses 1 to 8. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Do you hear the poetry in that? The balance? The recognition that life isn't one-dimensional? Solomon was discovering that perhaps the problem wasn't the activities themselves, but the timing and the purpose behind them. There's nothing wrong with pleasure if it comes at the right time and in the right measure. There's nothing wrong with work if it's balanced with rest. There's nothing wrong with wealth if it's held with open hands. There's nothing wrong with achievement if it's pursued for the right reasons. But what no one knew was that Solomon had been trying to force everything at once. He wanted constant pleasure without pain. He wanted endless building without rest. He wanted perpetual success without failure. He was fighting against the natural rhythm that God had built into creation. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11 reveals something even deeper. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. God has set eternity in the human heart. That's why nothing under the sun satisfies us. That's why earthly pleasures always leave us wanting more. That's why temporary achievements never bring lasting fulfillment. We were created for eternity, and only eternal things can satisfy our eternal souls. At that moment, he felt as if the world was starting to make sense again. Not complete sense, but partial sense. He couldn't understand everything God was doing. He couldn't see the full picture. But he was beginning to recognize that there was a picture, there was a plan, there was a purpose bigger than his own understanding. Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes 3 verse 14, "I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it so that people will fear him." Everything God does endures forever. That's the key. Solomon's buildings would crumble. His wealth would be redistributed. His achievements would be forgotten. But what God does, that lasts. That matters. That has eternal significance. And suddenly, Solomon saw his mistake. He had been trying to build his own kingdom, his own legacy, his own meaning. But the only kingdom that lasts is God's kingdom. The only legacy that matters is God's work. The only meaning that endures is found in God's purposes. And that's when everything changed. Solomon stopped fighting against the rhythm of life and started looking for God's hand in it. He stopped demanding answers and started trusting the one who has all the answers. He stopped trying to control everything and started surrendering to the sovereignty of God. But this realization brought a new problem. If God is sovereign, if God controls the timing of everything, if God has set eternity in our hearts, then why does he allow so much pain? Why does he permit so much injustice? Why does life feel so hard, so confusing, so often meaningless? Solomon wasn't done wrestling with these questions, and his next observation would challenge everything he thought he knew about God's justice. Solomon had recognized that God is sovereign over all things, that there is a time and purpose for everything. But this raised a troubling question in his mind. If God is in control, why does evil seem to prosper? Why do the wicked thrive while the righteous suffer? He wrote in Ecclesiastes 8 verse 14, "There's something else meaningless that occurs on earth. The righteous who get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked who get what the righteous deserve. This too, I say, is meaningless." Solomon had seen it with his own eyes. Good people, faithful people, people who honored God and followed his commands, they suffered illness, poverty, persecution. Meanwhile, wicked people, those who mocked God, oppressed the poor, and lived for themselves, they prospered, they thrived, they died peacefully in their old age surrounded by wealth and comfort. Where was the justice? Where was God's intervention? Where was the divine judgment that Solomon had been taught to expect? But what no one knew was that this paradox was tearing Solomon apart. Because if good behavior doesn't guarantee good outcomes, and evil behavior doesn't guarantee punishment, then what's the point of being righteous? Why not just pursue pleasure and power and wealth like everyone else? Ecclesiastes 8 verse 11 reveals the dangerous conclusion people draw. When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. In other words, when people see the wicked getting away with evil, they lose their moral compass. They think God isn't watching, or God doesn't care, or worse, there is no God. And so they join the corruption. They become part of the problem. Solomon had seen this happen in his own court. Officials who started out honest gradually became corrupt because they saw others profiting from dishonesty without consequence. Merchants who once feared God eventually abandoned their integrity because they watched unethical competitors succeed while they struggled. At that moment, he felt as if the world was governed by chaos rather than divine justice. The scales weren't balanced. The books weren't being kept. Evil went unpunished and goodness went unrewarded. But then, in his wisdom, Solomon glimpsed something deeper. He wrote in Ecclesiastes 8 verses 12 to 13, "Although a wicked person who commits 100 crimes may live a long time, I know that it will go better with those who fear God, who are reverent before him. Yet because the wicked do not fear God, it will not go well with them, and their days will not lengthen like a shadow." I know. Those two words carry enormous weight. Despite what he sees with his eyes, despite the apparent injustice, despite the confusion, Solomon says, I know. Not I think, or I hope, or I suspect. I know. He knows that ultimately, in the final accounting, it will go better for those who fear God. The timing might not match our expectations. The justice might not arrive in this lifetime, but it will come. And that's when everything changed in Solomon's theology. He realized that he had been evaluating everything from a temporal perspective, from an under-the-sun viewpoint. But God operates from an eternal perspective. God sees not just this life, but the life to come. God judges not just visible actions, but hidden motives. Ecclesiastes 12 verse 14 would later confirm this understanding. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Every deed, every hidden thing. Nothing escapes God's notice. Nothing goes unaccounted for. The wicked might prosper for a season, but judgment is coming. The righteous might suffer for a time, but reward is certain. But Solomon also recognized his own limitation. Ecclesiastes 8 verse 17 admits, I saw all that God has done. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all their efforts to search it out, no one can discover its meaning. Even if the wise claim they know, they cannot really comprehend it. This was humility speaking. This was Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, admitting that he doesn't have all the answers. He can't explain why God allows what he allows. He can't comprehend the full mystery of divine providence. But he can trust. He can fear God. He can choose to believe that God is just even when justice seems delayed. He can hold onto faith even when circumstances contradict it. And that faith, that trust, that reverence for God despite the mysteries, that was leading Solomon toward something profound. Something that would transform his entire understanding of happiness and meaning. After all his searching, after all his experiments, after all his disappointments, Solomon began to notice something he had overlooked in his frantic pursuit of meaning. The simple gifts, the everyday blessings, the ordinary joys that God sprinkles throughout life. He wrote in Ecclesiastes 2 verses 24 to 25, A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This, too, I see, is from the hand of God, for without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? At first glance, this might sound like Solomon giving up, like he's saying, nothing matters, so just eat and drink and try to enjoy yourself. But look closer. He says this satisfaction, this enjoyment, is from the hand of God. It's a gift. It's grace. Solomon had spent decades chasing extraordinary pleasures, building magnificent monuments, accumulating massive wealth. And he had missed the extraordinary beauty in ordinary things. A good meal, honest work, a peaceful night's sleep, the warmth of the sun, the taste of cool water, the laughter of friends. But what no one knew was that these simple joys had been there all along. They had been available to him every single day. But he had been too busy, too distracted, too focused on bigger things to notice them. Ecclesiastes 3 verses 12 to 13 expands this idea. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink, and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. The gift of God, not the achievement of humanity, not the reward for hard work, not the result of wisdom or wealth or power. A gift. Solomon realized that he had been trying to earn happiness, to manufacture meaning, to create fulfillment through his own efforts. But happiness can't be earned. It can only be received. It's not something you achieve. It's something you accept. He wrote in Ecclesiastes 5 verses 18 to 20, "This is what I have observed to be good, that it is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to be satisfied with their work during the few days of life God has given them. For this is their lot." Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and be happy in their toil, this is a gift of God. They seldom reflect on the days of their life, because God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart. God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart. What a beautiful phrase. When you learn to receive God's simple gifts with gratitude, when you learn to find joy in ordinary moments, you don't have time to spiral into existential despair. You're too busy being grateful. At that moment, he felt as if the world was revealing a secret that had been hiding in plain sight. Happiness wasn't at the top of the mountain. It was along the path. Meaning wasn't in the destination. It was in the journey. Fulfillment wasn't in extraordinary achievements. It was in faithful presence in ordinary moments. Solomon thought about the simple farmer he had observed earlier in his journey. The man who worked hard, ate his bread with joy, slept soundly, and woke up grateful for another day. That man had what Solomon, with all his wealth and wisdom, had been searching for: contentment, peace, the ability to enjoy God's gifts without constantly craving more. And that's when everything changed. Solomon stopped measuring his life by what he had accomplished and started measuring it by how well he received what God had given. He stopped comparing himself to others and started thanking God for his unique portion. He stopped chasing after wind and started resting in God's provision. But this wasn't the end of his journey, because Solomon realized that even these simple joys, as wonderful as they are, point to something greater. They're not the ultimate meaning. They're signposts pointing toward the ultimate meaning. What is that ultimate meaning? Solomon was about to discover the answer that would finally satisfy his soul. Solomon had come full circle. He had started his reign asking God for wisdom. And now, after decades of searching, experimenting, failing, and learning, he was rediscovering the foundation of all true wisdom. The fear of the Lord. Not terror, not cowering in dread, but reverence, awe, a deep, profound respect for who God is. A recognition that we are creatures and He is Creator, that we are finite and He is infinite, that we are temporary and He is eternal. Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes 12 verse 13, "Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind." This is it. This is the answer. After 60-plus minutes of wrestling with meaninglessness, after exploring every avenue of human pursuit, after testing every theory about happiness, Solomon arrives at this simple, profound truth: fear God and keep His commandments. But what no one knew was how hard Solomon had to fight to get back to this truth. Because he had known it once. God had appeared to him. God had blessed him. God had given him everything. But somewhere along the way, Solomon had stopped fearing God and started using God. He had used God's temple to boost his reputation. He had used God's wisdom to impress foreign dignitaries. He had used God's blessings to justify his excesses. He had treated God as a tool for his purposes rather than submitting himself as a tool for God's purposes. And that's when everything fell apart. That's when the emptiness crept in. That's when the meaninglessness took over. Because when you lose the fear of the Lord, you lose the foundation for everything else. At that moment, he felt as if the world suddenly made sense. Not complete sense. He still didn't understand everything, but enough sense. He understood that life isn't about figuring everything out. It's about trusting the one who has figured everything out. Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes 8 verse 12, "Although a wicked person who commits 100 crimes may live a long time, I know that it will go better with those who fear God, who are reverent before Him." I know, despite the mysteries, despite the apparent injustices, despite the unanswered questions. I know that it goes better with those who fear God. This wasn't blind faith. This was tested faith. This was faith that had been through the fire and came out refined. Solomon had tried everything else. He had exhausted every alternative. And he had discovered, through painful experience, that nothing works except surrendering to God. The fear of the Lord isn't about being afraid. It's about being aligned. It's about recognizing your proper place in the universe. It's about understanding that God is God and you are not. And when you get that relationship right, everything else falls into place. Not perfectly, not without pain, not without mystery, but meaningfully. Ecclesiastes 7 verse 18 says, "It is good to grasp the one and not let go of the other. Whoever fears God will avoid all extremes." The fear of God brings balance. It prevents you from the extreme Solomon fell into. The extreme of asceticism that denies all pleasure. The extreme of hedonism that pursues only pleasure. The extreme of workaholism. The extreme of laziness. The extreme of isolation. The extreme of people-pleasing. When you fear God, you hold everything with appropriate tension. You enjoy God's gifts without worshiping them. You work hard without making work your identity. You pursue wisdom without thinking you know everything. You seek justice without playing God. And that's when everything changed for Solomon. He stopped trying to be God and started trying to know God. He stopped demanding answers and started trusting the one who has all the answers. He stopped building his kingdom and started seeking God's kingdom. But Solomon knew his story wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who would come after him, everyone who would read his words, everyone who would face the same temptations, the same empty pursuits, the same search for meaning. And he had one final, crucial message to deliver. Solomon's final revelation was the most sobering and most liberating truth of all. Everything, every action, every word, every thought will be brought into judgment before God. He declared in Ecclesiastes 12 verse 14, "For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil." Every deed, every hidden thing, nothing is forgotten, nothing is overlooked, nothing escapes God's perfect knowledge and perfect justice. For some, this truth brings terror. For others, it brings hope. For the oppressed who never saw justice in this life, it means their suffering was not in vain. God saw. God remembered. God will make it right. For the wicked who seem to prosper without consequence, it means the bill is coming due. The accounting will happen. Justice delayed is not justice denied. But what no one knew was that this truth transformed how Solomon viewed his entire life. Every moment mattered, because every moment would be evaluated by God. Not just the public moments, the speeches, the judgments, the temple ceremonies, but the private moments, the secret compromises, the hidden idolatries, the quiet betrayals. Ecclesiastes 11 verse 9 warns young people, "Be happy, young man, while you are young, and let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart and whatever your eyes see, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment." Follow your heart, yes. Enjoy your youth, yes. But know that judgment is coming. Live with the awareness that your life is being written into an eternal record. Every choice has eternal consequences. This wasn't meant to paralyze people with fear. It was meant to liberate them from the tyranny of the immediate. When you know that God sees everything and will judge everything, you're freed from the pressure to get earthly justice right now. You're freed from the need to defend yourself constantly. You're freed from the anxiety about whether people recognize your worth. God sees. God knows. God will judge. And his judgment is perfect. At that moment, he felt as if the world was no longer a chaotic, meaningless place, but a testing ground, a preparation for eternity. Every trial had purpose. Every joy had meaning. Every choice mattered, because it was shaping who you would be forever. Solomon looked back on his life with this eternal perspective. His wisdom, a gift from God to be used for God's glory, not his own reputation. His wealth, A stewardship to be managed for God's purposes, not his own pleasure. His power? An authority delegated by God to serve God's justice, not his own ambitions. And where he had failed, where he had misused God's gifts, where he had turned aside to idols and pleasures and pride, there would be judgment. Not vindictive punishment, but honest accounting. God would evaluate his stewardship. God would judge his choices. God would separate the gold from the dross. And that's when everything changed in Solomon's final understanding. Life wasn't meaningless. It was full of meaning because it was preparing you for eternity. Your choices weren't insignificant. They were shaping your eternal destiny. Your time wasn't wasted if you spent it in reverence to God, even if earthly success never came. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 17 captures this hope. I said to myself, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked, for there will be a time for every activity, a time to judge every deed. There will be a time, not now necessarily, not according to our schedule, but there will be a time when everything is made right, when every wrong is addressed, when every good deed is rewarded, when every act of faith is vindicated. This is why Solomon could say, "Fear God and keep his commandments," with confidence. Because God is real, God is just, God is watching, and God will have the final word. For the wicked, this is terrifying. But for those who fear God, for those who have placed their trust in him, for those who have sought his kingdom above all else, this is the most comforting truth in the universe. Your life matters. Your choices matter. Your faithfulness matters. Not because you're building a kingdom here on earth that will last forever, but because you're investing in a kingdom that will never end. And Solomon, having learned this lesson the hardest way possible, was ready to deliver his final words of wisdom to all who would listen. And so we come to the end of Solomon's journey. The richest man who ever lived. The wisest king in history. The one who had everything and discovered it was nothing. The one who searched everywhere and found the answer was right in front of him all along. What is King Solomon's hidden secret? Why do most people miss the true meaning of happiness? Because they're looking for it in the wrong place. They're looking under the sun, in earthly things, in temporary pleasures, in human achievements, in mortal relationships, in worldly success. And all of those things, every single one of them, will fail you. Not because they're evil, but because they were never designed to carry the weight of your soul's deepest longing. Solomon discovered what St. Augustine would later express perfectly. You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. We were made for God, and until we find our rest, our peace, our purpose, our meaning in him, we will always be empty, always searching, always restless, always disappointed. The hidden secret is this: true happiness isn't found in getting what you want. It's found in wanting what God wants. It's not found in achieving your dreams. It's found in surrendering to God's dreams for you. It's not found in building your kingdom. It's found in seeking his kingdom first. Jesus would later teach this same truth. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Not seek first pleasure and add God later. Not seek first success and squeeze God in. Seek first, prioritize above all else. Make primary in your life the kingdom of God. And when you do that, when you fear God and keep his commandments, when you live with an eternal perspective, when you receive his simple gifts with gratitude, when you trust his timing even when you don't understand it, something miraculous happens. You find the happiness that everyone is searching for. Not the temporary high of a new purchase. Not the fleeting satisfaction of an achievement. Not the shallow pleasure of entertainment. But deep, abiding, unshakable joy that survives disappointment, endures suffering, and transcends circumstances. This is what Solomon finally understood. This is what he wanted to pass on to every generation that would come after him. This is the conclusion of the matter, the summary of all his wisdom, the secret hidden in plain sight. Fear God. Keep his commandments. Remember that he will judge every deed. And live your life accordingly. That's it. That's the secret. Not complicated. Not mysterious. not hidden in some esoteric knowledge. It's right there, accessible to everyone, available to anyone who will humble themselves and receive it. The tragedy is that most people, just like Solomon, have to learn this the hard way. They have to exhaust every alternative. They have to try everything else first. They have to hit rock bottom before they look up. But you don't have to. You can learn from Solomon's mistakes. You can skip the decades of empty pursuit. You can avoid the trap of thinking that one more achievement, one more purchase, one more relationship, one more experience will finally satisfy you. It won't. Only God can satisfy the hunger He placed in your heart. Only eternity can fulfill the eternity He set within you. Only the Creator can complete what He created. So what will you choose? Will you spend your life chasing wind? Or will you anchor your soul in the unchanging, eternal, infinitely satisfying God? Solomon's message echoes across the centuries. Choose wisely. Choose now. Choose God. Because at the end of your life, when you've tried everything else, you'll discover what He discovered. God was the answer all along. Fear the Lord. Find your joy in Him. Live for His glory. And you'll discover the true meaning of happiness that most people spend their entire lives searching for, but never find. This is Solomon's hidden secret. This is the truth that changes everything. This is the wisdom that brings life. May you find it today. May you live it tomorrow. And may you rest in it forever. Amen. If this journey through Solomon's life has spoken to your heart, if you're recognizing yourself in his story, if you're ready to stop chasing wind and start seeking God, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Share how this message has impacted you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Life in Christ, because we're here to walk together through God's Word, discovering truths that transform lives. Remember, your story doesn't have to end the way Solomon's almost did. You can turn to God today. You can find the happiness you've been searching for. You can discover that the meaning of life isn't hidden. It's revealed in the person of Jesus Christ, who came to seek and save the lost, who died and rose again so that we might have eternal life. God bless you, and until next time, keep seeking, keep growing, keep living your life in Christ.